At precisely 11:23 a.m. on September 19, 1944, the interior of an American M4 Sherman tank near Arrault, France, felt less like a fighting vehicle and more like a sealed iron coffin rattling under a hammer. The engine roared behind them, the turret groaned as it traversed, and every bolt vibrated as if the tank itself knew what was coming. Private First Class. Walter Kowalski crouched low on the right side of the turret, boots braced against the steel. Floor, shoulders hunched, breathing shallow and fast. 3 German Panzer IV tanks were advancing directly toward them, closing from 800 yards with deliberate, confident precision. Walter's hands were shaking, not because he lacked courage, but because his mind would not let go of what had happened 2 days earlier. The man who had stood exactly where Walter stood now had been alive, joking, complaining about the cold, until a German shell punched cleanly through the turret. The loader had been killed instantly. There was no scream, no chance, no body to pull out. Just fragments and smoke, and a silence that lingered far longer than it should have. Walter had helped clean what was left. That memory clung to him now, sticky and relentless. Walter was not supposed to be here. He was a mechanic by training, not a loader by trade. He had been pulled from a motor pool and shoved into a turret because the 4th Armored Division was bleeding men faster than replacements could arrive. He had loaded exactly 4 practice rounds in his entire life, all of them on a calm training ground where nobody was trying to kill him. Now he was expected to load live 75mm shells, while German tanks rolled closer with every second. The gunner to his left was shouting about traverse speed, voice cracking as he fought to keep the crosshairs steady. Above them, the tank commander was yelling target, bearings through the open hatch, his words tumbling over one another in panic and urgency. The driver, half blind inside his compartment, was reversing the Sherman into a hedgerow, trying to angle the hull just enough to reduce their exposed profile without stalling the engine. Inside the turret, it felt like the world was shrinking, and in the middle of it all stood Walter, the loader, holding the one job that could not fail. He reached into the ready rack and pulled free the first shell. It weighed 38 pounds, almost as much as a full toolbox, and it felt heavier than it had any right to. High explosive. The brass casing was cold and slick, coated in a film of oil and grime. His palms were soaked with sweat. Training echoed in his head like a shouted checklist. Grip the shell nose forward, align the base with the breech, slam it home, step clear. 4 seconds if you were good, 5 if you were nervous. Anything longer, and you were dead. Walter tried to follow the drill. He turned to face the breach head-on, just like they had shown him at Fort Knox. Immediately, the cramped reality of the Sherman turret punished him for it. His left elbow smashed into the gunner's shoulder. The gunner cursed and shoved him away without looking. The shell wobbled in Walter's grip, nearly slipping free. For half a second, an eternity in combat, Walter lost control. The commander's voice rose into a scream. The German tanks were closer now, 600 yards, maybe less. Walter realized with sudden clarity that if he tried to do this the right way, they were all going to die. So he did something no manual had ever suggested, something no instructor would have allowed, something that violated every safety rule written since the Sherman entered service. He turned his back to the breach. Without looking, Walter reached behind himself with his left hand, fingers searching blindly for the hot metal rim of the open. Breach. His right hand gripped the base of the shell. His fingertips found the opening by feel alone. He guided the shell backward, angling it carefully, then shoved hard with his arm and shoulder. The breech caught the casing and slammed shut with a metallic crack. The gun fired instantly. The recoil slammed the cannon backward, blasting hot air, smoke, and burning cordite against Walter's neck and shoulders. The heat singed his skin through the fabric of his uniform. His ears rang violently. He barely noticed. He was already reaching for the next shell. Back turned, left hand guiding, right hand driving. 3 seconds, the breech slammed shut. The gun fired again. Walter's world narrowed to rhythm and motion. Grab, turn, feel, ram, fire. His fear vanished, replaced by something colder and sharper. Instinct, muscle memory forming in real time. The third shell went in faster than the second. 2.5 seconds. Fire. The commander's shouting faded into background noise. The gunner stopped yelling altogether. He trusted the rhythm now. The fourth shell went in almost without thought. 2 seconds flat. Outside the tank, 4 German Panzer IVs burned in a field less than 400 yards away. Flames poured from their hatches. Black smoke curled into the sky. Inside the Sherman, silence fell like a dropped blanket. The engine idled. The turret stopped moving. Walter stood frozen, back still turned to the breech, hands blackened with powder residue, chest heaving. The gunner stared at him as if he had just witnessed something impossible. The commander climbed down from the hatch, eyes locked on Walter, trying to reconcile what he had seen with everything he knew. Nobody loaded a 75mm cannon like that. It violated every safety protocol, every training procedure, every rule written since 1942. But it worked. And in that moment, though none of them realized it yet, American tank warfare changed. The M4 Sherman that Walter served in had never been designed to fight German tanks head-on. It was conceived in 1941 as a support vehicle, reliable, simple, easy to mass-produce. It was meant to accompany infantry, punch through defensive lines, and exploit breakthroughs. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States built nearly 50,000 of them. No other tank came close in numbers. But numbers did not stop shells. The Sherman's 75mm gun could penetrate roughly 3 inches of armor at 500 yards. That was enough to kill a Panzer III. It was barely enough against a Panzer IV, and only from favorable angles. Against Panthers and Tigers, it was almost useless from the front. German engineers knew this. By late 1943, German tanks were rolling off assembly lines with frontal armor specifically designed to defeat Sherman shells at normal combat ranges. American doctrine insisted the Sherman's advantage lay in speed, mobility, and coordination. 5 Shermans could outmaneuver 1 Panzer. On paper, the math worked. In the hedgerows of France, it meant 4 Shermans burned, so the 5th could maybe get a flanking shot. Tank crews had a name for it. The death ratio. During the summer of 1944, Allied forces often lost 4 or 5 Shermans for every German tank destroyed. At Villers-Bocage, a Ridiculed single Tiger tank wiped out 25 Allied vehicles in 15 minutes. During Operation Goodwood, British units lost 200 Shermans in a single day. Roads across France were littered with twisted hulls and scorched turrets. Every tanker had seen it. Every tanker smelled it. Burned oil, burned metal, burned men. When a Sherman was hit, the loader usually died first. He stood closest to the ready rack, where 20 shells were stored. When those shells cooked off, there was nothing left to recover. American crews tried everything. Sandbags stacked on the glacis plate, spare track welded to the turret, fake command markings to draw enemy fire. None of it changed the fundamental problem. In a tank duel, the crew that fired first usually lived. That meant speed mattered. Rate of fire mattered. Seconds mattered. A standard Sherman loader could manage 4 to 5 seconds per round under ideal conditions. German Panzer IV loaders could match that. Panthers were slower, but they did not need to hurry. Their guns killed from farther away. Sherman crews had to close the distance, survive the first shot, and fire faster than the enemy. At Fort Knox, loaders drilled endlessly. Face the breach, 2 hands on the shell. Ram straight forward. Safe, repeatable, clean. It worked perfectly on a stationary range, where nothing moved and nobody shot back. What Fort Knox never considered was what happened inside a moving tank under fire, especially if the loader was left-handed. Walter Kowalski was one of thousands. The Army did not track handedness. Instructors taught one method. If you were left-handed, you learned to load right-handed. That was the rule. On a quiet range, it worked well enough. In combat, it was killing people. The interior of a Sherman turret measured roughly 7 feet across at its widest point. The loader stood on the right. The gunner sat on the left. The commander hovered above and behind them. When the gun fired, it recoiled 18 inches backward. When the turret traversed, everything inside shifted violently. A right-handed loader could pivot smoothly, lead with his strong hand, and load without interfering with the gunner. A left-handed loader had to fight his own body, leading with the weaker hand, twisting awkwardly, elbows swinging wide, colliding with equipment and crew. Training instructors called the slower times acceptable. Combat proved they were fatal. After-action reports from September 1944 quietly noted loaders killed mid-cycle, shells dropped, breaches jammed. Delays of seconds turned into direct hits. One report described a left-handed loader fumbling a shell for 8 seconds. A Panzer round struck the turret before the gun could fire. Again. The loader died instantly. The gunner lost both legs. The problem was not incompetence, it was physics, space, and human instinct. Even right-handed loaders struggled when the tank moved. The Sherman had no gun stabilization. The breech bounced as the tank crossed rough ground. Loaders often grabbed the breech rim with one hand to steady themselves, loading with the other. One-handed loading of a 38-pound shell was slow and dangerous. Dropped shells took precious seconds to recover. By then, the enemy had already fired. Tank commanders watched this happen again and again. They knew the problem. They had no solution. Until Walter's shoulder gave out. 2 days before the fight that would define him, a glancing Panzer hit slammed Walter into the turret wall, dislocating his right shoulder. A medic popped it back into place and told him he was finished. A loader who couldn't lift with both arms was useless. But the division was short 36 loaders that week alone. Walter's commander kept him anyway. Unable to lift with his right arm, Walter improvised. Panic became experimentation. Experimentation became discovery. By turning his back, he solved problems no manual had ever addressed. And in 6 minutes on a September morning in France, a terrified left-handed mechanic loaded faster than any trained loader in the battalion.